sauce for just 99 cents. Wow, you heard that right. Get Prego Italian sauce for just 99 cents. Wednesday only.
Sentencing of today was not unexpected. We understood that Alexei will be in prison until Putin is in power, the day that he was incarcerated a little bit over a year ago. He is indeed frail, but he sends his powerful message from behind the bars and from the court bench, and it's an inspiration for our team and for all Russian people.
Vladimir, he was sentenced to 9 more years in maximum security prison penal colony for, they say, stealing from the organization that you actually now run. So Putin's spokesman tells CNN that no one is afraid of him. I'm quoting Peskov talking about Navalny. No one is afraid of him. If a person is a criminal, he should be in prison. Again, they're saying he stole from the organization you now run. That is why he is now going to a penal colony prison, maximum security for 9 years. What do you say to that?
Anti-Corruption Foundation, the Russian NGO that was the center of our political activity, was accepting donations from Russian citizens, and at no point Alexei was receiving either salary or any other payouts from the organization. The trial was really a sham trial, and the charges were trumped up. And this is not the first example of political persecution of Alexei Navalny using the law enforcement. His brother served 3.5 years in Russian prison, and his sentencing before that, when he got the suspended sentence, was also based on falsified accusation of corruption. And corruption, ironically, was something that Navalny focused on as something that Russian system of government is based on.
And he's done incredible work on his research on Putin's lifestyle and where he lives, and all of that has been simply incredible investigative work. Vladimir, I spoke yesterday with the Russian actress Masha Mashkova. She is the daughter of, obviously, the very popular Russian actor Vladimir Mashkov, who has appeared in many blockbuster movies, including along with Tom Cruise. Mashkov spoke last week at Putin's propaganda rally. I know you're well aware of that. And his daughter has chosen to speak out, even though she loves her father, to say he is wrong and that the war is wrong. And so she did this, and she told me her father, she talked to her father about it. And here's what he said to her.
He asked me to come back to Russia immediately, to take my daughters with me, and to be a good Russian, to ask for forgiveness for betrayal, and to be with Russian people, with my people, to help fight Ukrainian Nazis.
Vladimir, it is incredible what Russians who speak out, Masha, you, others, Alexei, the incredible risk that you take just by doing that.
Indeed, the divisions between people who support this oppressive regime and are really pillars of propaganda, like the actor Mashkov, and these divisions runs through families, as we see in the case of his daughter and himself. And his daughter Maria is very brave of speaking against this regime, the aggression, and her father.
Yeah, I mean, as she said, he calls her his own daughter, whom he loves, a betrayer, betraying her country. Vladimir, you and I have talked over the past year about your friend Alexei Navalny. Obviously, Masha speaks from Los Angeles in that case, and she does so still at personal risk. But Alexei Navalny chose to go back in, and he chose to do that because he knew he would be arrested the first time, right? He thought that was the right thing to do. Do you wish that he hadn't?
When he was first recovering after the poisoning in Germany, I thought it was my duty as his friend and ally to tell him that he doesn't have to go back to Russia. There are different options, at least to explain to him that that's not the one-way street. But when I talked to him after he started his recovery, and after we exchanged ideas, I thought it was really a moot point The work of his life is in Russia. Millions of supporters are there. He has done nothing wrong. It would be really against his character and everything that he's done not to go back to Russia. So it was an incredibly brave thing, but it was the only logical thing for him to do. And it's an inspiration for us all.
Vladimir, thank you very much. And more now on the other breaking story we're covering this hour. Senators questioning President Biden's nominee for the Supreme Court, Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. Here is Senator Cory Booker speaking now.
But easy there, New Jersey.
Mr. Chairman, I would request that my colleagues in the Democratic Party would stop interrupting me. But he talked about your speech, and when I read your speech, there's a couple things that jumped out. First of all, he acknowledged it was a very powerful speech, very moving speech about extraordinary black women. I have a criticism. Your mother was not in it, but I will leave that alone. But there's some things he honed in on, almost as if they seemed to be accusations, which don't hold merit to me. We have a saying in New Jersey, I felt it was all hat and no cattle. And so he said that you called the woman who wrote the 1619 Project, that you called her provocative. That's not a compliment necessarily if you call someone provocative, is it?
No.
No, I mean, I think Ted Cruz is very provocative. And that doesn't mean I agree with what he's saying, his philosophy. It doesn't mean I agree with his statements. But he pointed out you also called the author acclaimed. She won a Pulitzer Prize, correct?
She did.
In journalism. So she is acclaimed.
She is.
But in nowhere are you heralding her as this is reflective of your philosophy. That's true, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so I don't understand that at all. Part of his chart also was a lot of ellipses, skipping out things, but you mentioned critical race theory when you're talking about policies in general. I actually went back to that talk too, and I saw you threw everything in there. You were talking about psychology, economics, all different types of disciplines as touching upon the law. I think there was everything in there, I seem to be, except for astrology. But you understand that you were just listing a list of things that people could say touch the law. They weren't your philosophies at all.
Correct, Senator, and that speech was not related to what I do as a judge. That was talking about sentencing policy and all of the different academic disciplines that might relate to it.
Yeah, and then finally, we're entering an age that is surprising to me in American society where lots of books are being banned and lots of talks about books being read. You're on the board of a private school, and you have no supervision or authority over what books the children read in a private school, correct?
Correct.
I really do appreciate that. Jumping really quickly to a lot of talk today about these child exploitation cases. And Senator Durbin, I think that actually Josh Hawley used the word attack when describing his own, so I don't understand what that point of sensitivity was. But individual cases, and we've now heard about two, you've presided over as a judge more than 10, 15 cases?
I've presided over 14 cases that involve child sex crimes, but over my career as a trial judge, I've presided over more than 100.
Right, and cases are heavily fact-specific, right?
That is true.
Did you remember all the facts of the case that Senator Hawley was?
I did not.
You did not, right. And the facts matter, right?
They do.
And as a judge, you're looking at all of the facts of the case, not just what might be talked about later or what people are honing in. You have to take everything into account and make a decision, correct?
Yes, that's what Congress has required judges to do.
Right, and just to clarify that Congress thing, because again, you went to this elite law school. I went to a gritty inner city law school, Yale. So you know this better than me, but it was actually 1984 that the sentencing laws, the sentencing standards were passed down, correct?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, it was 1984. And then later in 2002 or 3, things were updated. But that 1984 was before the internet completely. And I just want to clarify also the Booker decision.
Yes.
Could you just clarify for the record, because my mom might be watching, no relation to me whatsoever, correct?
So The Booker decision, which earlier I mentioned that I thought Justice Scalia wrote
was
it. In
not.
fact, it was Justice Stevens.
Yes.
But Justice Scalia concurred, so he had a separate opinion, and he had written a previous decision that was very similar.
Yes.
The Booker decision made the guidelines, the sentencing guidelines, advisory.
Why? Why would the Supreme Court, joined by some of the most conservative members, why would they do that?
Well, they determined that, in essence, the Booker, that if the guidelines were mandatory, that it would violate the right to a jury trial to have jurors decide every aspect of your sentencing.
Yeah,
So,
it's just sort of the separation of powers, Sixth Amendment.
Yes.
This is really important.
yes.
Very strong wind out of the north, sustained between, 20 and 30 miles per hour, at times over 30 miles per hour. Marshall, though, only 9 miles per hour, and thankfully the
Cover a land of incredible.
Understand what kind of justice she would be?
To some extent, Judy, I think the better questions are more about how you approach cases rather than discussing, I think, particular cases and how you ruled on them. I think part of what's going on with respect to some of the senators is they're thinking about their public persona. They're thinking about running for offices or another office in particular, and they've got to speak to their base, and they're doing so by asking these questions.
And Margaret Russell, to you, I mean, taking these questions along with the others that have been posed to Judge Jackson, are we getting a sense of her, how she would judge, how she would rule from the bench if she's confirmed?
Well, I think we're getting an excellent sense of her demeanor because she has had to answer rapid fire questions, and some that are really more speeches and accusations than questions. And I think she has been very composed, but full-throated at some times when it is clear that what is being lobbed at her is unfair. And I think they're of the child pornography questions that she got.
And staying with you.
Presided over fact-specific cases of the most heinous crimes, that somehow the implication that you are somehow out of the norm of other federal judges that we have confirmed where these issues have never come up, who, again, I held up this chart, but the majority of the decisions, a percentage of sentences below guideline range in non-production child pornography cases, in D.C., 80% of them are under the guidelines. In Missouri, 77%. In Iowa, 62%. In North Carolina, 77%. In Nebraska, 81%. And so on and so on and so forth, down to Utah, alphabetical order, 71%. And so this implication that somehow your thoughtfulness on these very dense, fact-specific cases is somehow out of the norm, to me, does not hold up, doesn't head water. And then you add that to the endorsements that you have gotten from folks that deal with victim advocacy groups. It is, to me, just a line of attack that it does not hold in no way for me. I'm sorry. In the totality of your career, what you've accomplished and what you've done, I just think it's unfortunate that, unlike the sort of fair arbiters of this on both sides of the aisle who've dismissed it, I appreciate the way you've sat there and addressed all of that stuff. And that really brings me to the larger implication. You talked a lot about your uncles. One of them served in Baltimore, is that right? As a police officer?
My brother was a police officer in Baltimore.
The gentleman over there?
Yes.
Who volunteered to serve in the United States military?
Yes.
And you have talked about that police work, right?
Yes.
I live in Newark. I love my city. If you cut me, I bleed bricks. And let's go with the nickname of our city is Brick City. Your brother and I probably understand something. The majority of murder victims in the United States of America, do you know who the majority of murder victims are?
I don't.
They're black men. I imagine in your conversations with your brother and your two uncles, you who patrolled some of these streets, I imagine you feel in a different way about the anguish of what many communities of color struggle with when it comes to crime. Am I right there?
You are right, Senator. It is very anguishing, and it is something that I know all too well.
And you are a person that has that same fear that many mothers have for their daughters who do go out in this world. My mom used to say, when you have a child, it's like your heart going around outside of your body all of a sudden. And I just find it hard to believe, given your law enforcement background, you're a mom, that you take any of this urgency to keep America safe. And then I see that, like, folks I know well. I've worked with the FOP. I began negotiating with them. I have to say, I thought Jim Pascoe, before I knew him, it's a whole
with extra benefits like prescriptions, dental.
$99 a set. That's a saving.
I had some tough negotiations with my police union. He and I sat down and we shared our stories. And I think we realized we were coming from the same place when we were working on police reform. FOP endorsed you, and they wrote a powerful letter. I won't read it again. The IACP, they represent the largest, that's the rank and file, the FOP. The IACP represents the bosses, the managers. They endorse you. There's another group that maybe my colleagues don't know as well as I do. It's called Noble. Do you know them?
I do.
They're the black law enforcement organization nationally. People like your brother.
Yes.
Who love their communities.
Yes.
Who have seen, like I have, too many young men lying with bullet holes, bleeding into our pavements. These are folks who come from communities like your brother knows, where you too often see sidewalk shrines to murdered youth. I've talked to the women and men of Noble so many times. Anybody ever accuse them of being soft on crime? But they understand the complicated factors of crime in our country. And what they have to say to you about you, I won't read it, is just beautiful. Law enforcement family, mother of two, law enforcement organization after law enforcement organization, victims advocacy organizations after victims advocacy organizations, Republican appointed judges, Democratic appointed judges. That's who's in your corner. We're politicians. We have a sworn oath right now. I've just watched you with dignity and grace field what I can only imagine is behind those questions, is this doubt that is being sown. I just want America to know that when it comes to my family's safety, when it comes to Newark, New Jersey, or my state, God, I trust you. I trust you. Now, I brought in your mother, and I have to go back there. My mom has a saying that is awfully embarrassing when she talks about me. She says, she'll introduce me, and she'll say, behind every successful child is an astonished parent. But there's something about your mother, looking at her, is that she doesn't seem all too astonished. She seems like almost just very slyly she knew that a day like this might come. I have done a lot of hiring. Before I was in a legislative body, I ran New Jersey's largest city. And I could write a book about all the management mistakes I made in my first year and how it made me a really good manager. And the first mistake I made was I was just looking for the most talented, credentialed, skillful, smart people to help me run things. And I soon learned it wasn't enough. I made some mistakes in hiring. And I began to see that those skills, which you have a tremendous amount of, it's been said so many times, if stacking you up against other Supreme Court justices, you have more qualifications, more credentials than many of them. But I learned that you should hire first, that's necessary credentials, but not sufficient, that you should hire for character. That's what made me hire a great team in Newark eventually, and we operated so well. And so I believe I've gotten to know your character over these weeks, but I want America to know a little bit more about your character right now. And so I know my values. Booker T. Washington said it, James Baldwin said it. Children are never good at listening to their elders, but they never fail to imitate them. If I want to know your character, you haven't let me do this yet, but I want to hang out with your parents a little bit. And so let's draw them into this conversation. We won't swear them under oath, but their bedrock values that are most a part of your values now that you hope and pray are your grandchildren's, unborn grandchildren's values. What are those most important values you inherited from those two folk over there?
Thank you, Senator. I inherited a number of bedrock values, as you say, from my extraordinary parents. As I mentioned, my parents grew up in a time in this country in which black children and white children were not allowed to go to school together. They persevered. They were the first in their families to go to college, to have that chance. They each went to historically black universities, and they taught me hard work. They taught me perseverance. They taught me that anything is possible in this great country. And I think it came, as I said in my introduction, from the sea change that we had in this country from the 1960s when Congress passed 2 Civil Rights Acts and African Americans finally had the chance to become a part of the dream, become a part of the fabric of this wonderful nation. My parents moved to Washington, D.C. because this is where it all started for them in terms of having new freedoms. And I was born here on that hope and dream. I was born here with an African name that my parents gave me to demonstrate their pride in who they were and their pride and hope in what I could be.
And it seems to me, as a guy whose parents came here and you and I both were born here months apart, I would hear my parents' tough stories at the dinner table about facing bigotry. Here in the city, my father told me stories about his early jobs, but I never noticed a hint of bitterness or that hate he saw never generated hate with him. In fact, he just loved people, all people.
That is correct, Senator, and I would say that my wonderful parents went on to become extraordinary public servants. They had new opportunity. They could have done, other things, but each of them decided to give back to the community. My mother was in the public school system. She was a teacher and then became an administrator, became the principal of a magnet school for the arts in Miami, a new school that had started up, and became the sort of beloved principal of New World School of the Arts. And so many of her students continue to see me, meet me, and they know me for my mother, which is fantastic.
And she had diverse students.
She had extraordinarily
And she
diverse.
loved on all those children.
Everyone.
Black, white, Asian.
Everyone.
Well, let me ask you this, because I'm going to push you a little harder, because I have some people I really respect on the other side of the aisle, and they do. My friends and I talk about religion sometimes. Faith is important. I was teasing Lindsey, Senator Graham earlier, but I don't want to ask you anything specific about your faith except for this, because you brought it up in your opening statement, and I have to tell you, I don't think black women have any providence over struggle. People from all backgrounds in America struggle. But I do know often as the trailblazing black women, they have often faced many challenges being the first or being a trailblazer or breaking glass ceilings. But I know on your journey to this moment right now, you have faced very tough moments. probably you've been knocked down by life. I always say if America hasn't broken your
Enough? No, arthritis. Here.
I didn't know my genetic report could tell me
circumstance. You've been like Zora Neale Hurston, who says, I've been through sorrow's kitchen and I licked out all the pots. You've been like Langston Hughes to that poem, Mother to Son, life for me ain't been no crystal stair. Could you talk to me maybe about one moment or what you do when you get knocked down like that? Where do you get the grit and the guts to get back up and keep on going?
Well, Senator, I think that too is something that I learned from my grandparents, who, as I said, didn't have it easy. My grandparents, who didn't have a lot of formal education, but who were the hardest working people I've ever known, and who just got up every day and put one foot after the other and provided for their families and made sure that their children went to college, even though they never had those opportunities. I reflect on them in the context of this historic moment. I stand on the shoulders of people from that generation, and I focus at times on my faith when I'm going through hard times. Those are the kinds of things that I learned from my grandmother, who used to have those family dinners and bring us all together. And I think that's a common experience of Americans, that when you go through difficult times, you lean into family and you turn to faith. And that's part of my experience as well.
It's, I think, the experience of my colleagues and I on both sides of the aisle, leaning on that faith and that family. I want to give you, there's one thing about your opening statement, and I have to say, I haven't actually shaken your husband's hand yet, but yesterday I was mad at him because when he started tearing up at your remarks about him, it triggered, I don't really have it, but it triggered a sympathetic cry in me as well. So I'm a little upset at him, but I will deal with him individually. But you said something that I found provocative, to use that word one more time. And I felt afterwards, I reflected, I even talked to my staff about it, because I thought that statement, it didn't seem congruent to me. And it was, I don't know if it was a profession of humility or overly critical of yourself. But I want to end in my last 5 minutes giving you space to explain yourself to me, because much to my mom's chagrin, I am not a parent yet. And I'm looking at somebody that I admire. But you said something that struck me, because look, my mom was a working mom. And God, it was tough. My colleagues will not believe this, but there was a time I was very melodramatic, and I was in a bathtub of oatmeal bathtub, and my mom was getting ready to go on a business trip, and I look at her with these sad eyes, and I say, "Mom, if you leave me, I'll die." And she looked at me, knowing that you don't die from the chicken pox, but I still remember her going to the phone, having a long conversation, taking off her business suit and changing into her sweatpants. She would tell me later that that was not a sign of love. She loved me, but a lot of women who love their kids can't stay home because we don't have paid family leave in this country. So you said in your opening remarks that you haven't been as good of a parent, I think if I'm paraphrasing right, as good as a mom as you'd like to be. And I looked at your two girls, and I look at you, and I don't understand that statement. Could you maybe explain for me what you meant, and maybe take one more beat and explain to me what it means to you to be a mom of two young women growing up in America today?
Thank you, Senator. What I said in my statement was that that I had struggled, like so many working moms, to juggle motherhood and career. And it takes a lot of hard work to become a judge, to do the work of a judge, which I've done now for almost 10 years. You have a lot of cases. You don't have all that many resources, comparatively speaking, and it's a lot of early mornings and late nights. And what that means is there will be hearings during your daughter's recitals. There'll be emergencies on birthdays that you have to handle. And I know so many young women in this country, especially who have small kids, who have these momentous events and have to make a choice. You talked about your mom making the choice to make sure that she cared for you in that moment, and there are times when obviously you have to care for your family members. There are other times when there are events that you wish you could be a part of, but here's the emergency case that you have to deal with. And so I said in my opening that girls, you know, you've had to deal with me juggling motherhood and job responsibilities, and I didn't always get the balance right. And so I would hope for them, seeing me, hopefully you all will confirm me, seeing me moved to the Supreme Court, that they can know that you don't have to be perfect in your career trajectory and you can still end up doing what you want to do, that you just have to understand that there are lots of responsibilities in the world and that you don't have to be a perfect mom, but if you do your best and you love your children, that things will turn out okay.
Well, I'm sure your mom probably feels she wasn't perfect, but things have turned out okay. And I will tell you this. I'm sure they've said it, and if they haven't, I'm sure they will. The older I get, the more I appreciate my parents. I know they're proud of you, but as a guy who does have faith, and I sit at home in a room of my ancestors where I have generations of my ancestors' pictures up, and they're black folk and white folk. I have a very interesting family tree. I sit there to feel my ancestors sometimes and think about them. I hope right now, in this questions and blistering, that you know that at that desk there are a whole lot of spirits around you with their hands on you. Not only your children, your parents proud, but so are your ancestors. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Much, Senator Booker, and Judge Jackson had a lot of politicians on this committee, 22 of them. There's only one Cory Booker. And when he does his cross-examination on the human side, I always wait to see, can the witness get through this without a little emotion? There was a little there, as there should have been, as he talked about your family and your parents and your children. Cory, you're one of a kind. We love you. We have three more to ask questions tonight. Senator Kennedy, Senator Padilla, Senator Blackburn. We're going to break for 20 minutes, grab a bite to eat, freshen up, come back for the last round.
Thank you.
Senate stands in recess.
All right, as they stand in recess for that dinner break, I just want to have a chance to talk about what we just saw, what you've been watching today. Out front now is Elliott Williams, Deputy Assistant Attorney General under President Obama and the former counsel to the Senate Judiciary Committee. So, Elliott, what did you make of
Powders has been linked to ovarian cancer, and many large manufacturers of talc-based products failed.
We know that. What are you doing, the category?
Action today.
It's the Red Dot Clear the Lot sales event at Billion Nissan of...
They're socialists, I'm guessing. Socialists have to ruin every good time.
What is your favorite story from spring break back in the day in MTV era?
I have two. One was I got to introduce the band Bush as they performed for, you know, a rabid audience. Panama City Beach, they were so excited to see them. And it rained. It was just pouring rain, but it was that warm, wonderful Florida panhandle rain. It's like manna from the heavens. And everyone was dancing and singing along to everywhere. The lighting was beautiful. And, you know, you could see it on camera, just...
obligation to advise the president. They're using their time to film campaign commercials about critical race theory and how tough they are on crime. This has nothing to do with Judge Jackson's work. She testified today that her judicial decisions are based on the facts of the case, the arguments that both sides make, and what the law says. And that's why she has an excellent record and why her decisions have rarely been reversed. When you look at the record, she makes objective decisions, including in a case where the Republicans wanted Hillary Clinton's emails during a presidential campaign, and she decided against Hillary Clinton and in favor of the RNC. That's not the work of a critical race theorist. Joy, when you look at her actual record, the claim that Judge Jackson is a critical race theorist or soft on crime, it's nothing more than a right-wing lie. And I guess Judge Jackson's detractors have to make stuff up because her actual record is unimpeachable.
And by the way, they still think Ibram Kendi is a critical race theorist. I've asked them. He's not. They don't know what critical race theory is. They're not smart enough. Supposedly Ted Cruz went to law school. Apparently only Ketanji Brown Jackson was in class, and he was probably skipping classes and sleeping because he doesn't know what critical race theory is. Ibram X. Kendi is not a critical race theorist, and everyone who says he is an idiot or a liar. I have to say, and I'll end with this, and I guess I'll throw it to you, Harry. What bothered me about watching this today was men, and I'm going to specifically say Josh Hawley, who had nothing to say and fully supported Brett Kavanaugh. They're claiming that they are the defenders of the integrity of childhood. They're going to go after child pornography and rape, and they're going to defend, you know, the integrity of childhood. Brett Kavanaugh was accused credibly of rape, and the victims were teenage girls and college students, high school and college students. So Josh Hawley and Ted Cruz and Lindsey Graham and all the rest of you, Mike Lee, all of you, and Tom Thuggish Cotton, you didn't defend the teenage victims of the man you gleefully put in a lifetime position on the Supreme Court. You don't get to say anything about Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. She bested you intellectually, and you're mad about it. Stay mad. Paul Butler, Harry Littman, thank you very much. That is tonight's ReadOut. On with Chris Hayes starts now. Hi, Chris.
Joy, that was a great point. You know, one of the things I was thinking of as I was watching this, and I agree, just extremely, like, gross reactionary appeals to the kind of worst instincts around law, was precisely this sort of, you know, particularly Josh Hawley is like really disgusting. You know,
pregnant flight suits and FBI that behaves like Nancy Pelosi's Praetorian Guard. As if that weren't bad enough, Joe Biden announced in January his plan to choose the next Supreme Court justice on the basis of appearance. The Supreme Court, you never thought that would happen. Sociology department, maybe. Your company, perhaps. But the Supreme Court really matters. What does appearance have to do with ability or fealty to the Constitution? Joe Biden never explained. He'd indicate, to be fair, that he would prefer a lawyer for the job, maybe even a clever one. But mostly he said he wanted a black woman, genetics being the single most important factor in what we used to call judicial temperament. How does that work exactly? How do genes determine your ability as a Supreme Court justice or a surgeon or an airline pilot or anything else? We would love to hear Joe Biden explain that, but he didn't. Instead, he embarked on a predictably short nationwide search for such a candidate and located in the end a person called Ketanji Brown Jackson. Her confirmation hearings continue today for the second day. Not surprisingly, given how she got this job, most of the talk in Washington was not about what she's done, how she thinks, what she's like as a person, but instead about how she looks. It's not shallow or anything. Here's the shallowest of all, Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey.
I could not stop being just joyous that you were sitting in my office, and I couldn't stop bringing up to you the historical nature of this. Forgive me, I grew up in a small black church where I was taught to make a joyous noise unto the Lord. And this is not a normal day for America. We have never had this moment before.
I grew up in a small black church. No, you didn't. Another
jail cell. Alexei Navalny in court, trying to ask a question as he gets 9 years for fraud and contempt, a sentence imposed at a remote prison colony where the 45-year-old is already doing time. Even his lawyers were arrested outside the courthouse while promising to appeal. As soon as we receive the verdict, Navalny's attorney says, we will immediately file complaints. On his Twitter page, within minutes of his sentencing, a statement of gratitude for all the support that called Putin's regime war criminals.
This is not a surprise that Putin would like to keep Alexei in prison for as long as he is in power. We are completely sure that this is his direct order.
It's what life is like for an enemy of the state. On a flight in 2020, Navalny became violently ill. The cause, a nerve agent called Novichok, a banned chemical weapon probably added to his tea. Navalny coined the phrase, Putin the poisoner. Among other notable victims, Russian defector Alexander Litvinenko, poisoned in London with radioactive polonium, and Ukrainian presidential candidate Viktor Yushchenko, a victim of the dioxin used in Agent Orange.
He's been trying to kill me, have me arrested, do all sorts of terrible things to me.
Bill Browder, author of Red Notice, detailing his 2005 expulsion from Russia, telling NewsNation Prime he's seen up close the ruthlessness of Vladimir Putin.
He will do absolutely anything within his power to protect himself, and just himself. He doesn't care about Russia, he cares about himself.
And it was just last month that the Kremlin declared Alexei Navalny and some of his associates literally enemies of the state, extremists, terrorists, placing them on watch lists, Marnie, underscoring, experts say, the importance to Moscow, specifically to Vladimir Putin, of keeping him quiet, especially since the invasion of Ukraine.
Yet he still tweets from prison. Tom, live in New York tonight. Tom, thank you. Dr. Barry McManus is a veteran of the CIA specializing in information ops and deception. He joins us as a guest tonight. Dr. McManus, always appreciate your time. I want to start with Navalny, 9-year prison sentence. No real surprise. Your thoughts on what happened to him in court today?
Okay, first let's start with what the definition is of what Navalny. He is a political prisoner. He is what some would call a sort of the idea of a prisoner of consequence. That is someone who holds political views that may be different than President Putin or the Russian government. Putin is simply rounding up all the opposition, anyone who opposes his political will, he's rounding them up and he's putting them in prison. I think, Marnie, the question that I would ask is, why is Putin exerting so much patience and spending so much time in rounding up these opposition's leaders? And my answer would simply be his distraction for the Russian people away from Ukraine. That's one way of doing it. And I think, too, is that Putin, unlike Stalin, is not going to massacre thousands or millions of people, but he'll do it in a much softer way, in a sense, of putting someone like Navalny in prison and see him suffer, and eventually possibly the same outcomes will be the same.
But isn't Putin doing that? Isn't he massacring thousands of people right now as we speak?
Well, not in the sense of Russians, and I speak of the Russian people.
Right.
If you want to consider the Ukraine, I'm not speaking specifically of the Ukraine, because I think what he's doing is letting the Russian people know that if you step over these lines, this is what could happen to you. So in the end, he's doing a couple of things. As I said, I think he's letting the Russian people know this is what could happen to you if you step over the line. And yet I'm not going to do, let's say, what Stalin would do, and that he would purge the Russian people. He would, kill them at thousands, or if not millions of people. So we're going to do it a different way. Whether these charges are trumped up or not, it doesn't really matter. The charges are what they are. He's going to serve 9 years in prison, I guess. And the idea is what's behind his mentality, what's behind his behavior for the Russian people to see.
And the motivation for Putin, obviously, this is his enemy. He speaks out against him. His goal is to silence him. Yet, we see Navalny even today, 9 hours ago, tweeting out to his followers, 3 million or so on Twitter, that any activity against the deceitful and thievish Putin's regime, I need action. So he's saying, in order to support me, I need you to take action. Words are not enough. So he's not silenced.
No, he's not. But what the upper hand that I think Putin has right now, that he's not silenced, but what is he doing to the supporters of Navalny? One, that opposition party has gone underground to a certain degree. A lot of them are in exile, which they've left the country. So in some ways, who's winning here? I would say Putin is winning because he does have the upper hand. The network of supporters that Navalny had is disappearing. They've gone on, as I said, gone underground, out of the country. And also there's a further crackdown on freedom of speech in Russia. That also has an impact on the Russian people in general. So again, who's winning here? And in some ways, I believe he is still winning, even though the opposition party is still out there. But it's like choking the bear. I mean, after a while, he's going to pass out. So I think that's what he's doing to appease the Russian people.
Yeah. And I mean, we're talking about Russians in Russian prisons
who are fighting on behalf of Ukraine. We've certainly heard of, obviously, Chechnya is ruled by a Vladimir Putin thug who he put into power after leveling Grozny and installing that man in power. Are there Chechens fighting on the side of Ukraine? And just in general, what have you seen in terms of activity over the last day or so?
Yeah, there are Chechen units here, actually, and there are some all-Muslim units, too, as part of the Ukrainian armed forces or as militias who were helping to fight off the initial Russian invasion back in 2014, 2015. Now, most of them have been officially incorporated into the armed forces or attached themselves to the armed forces. They include volunteers from around, particularly the Caucasus and southern Caucasus, and, of course, a lot of Chechens who fought against the Russians are not happy with the rule of Kadyrov, who's been claiming, at any rate, through his Twitter account, to be marching around on the other side of these battles. Now, this battle that we recorded, we think pretty sure we geolocated to the eastern side of the Dnieper River. Most of the combat lately, though, today, certainly, Anderson, has been on this side, on the side that I am, on the western side of the river, and about 5 to 8, 10 miles north of where I'm standing in the northern edges and suburbs of the city, where there's been very heavy bombardment, very visible bombardments along the skyline as part, we think, of this ongoing Ukrainian offensive.
Kylie, I appreciate it. Be careful. First-hand perspective now from Lesia Vasylenko, member of the Ukrainian parliament. When we spoke just before airtime, she was in a village just west of the capital. Ms. Vasylenko, thank you so much for joining us. President Zelensky has said that he believes a compromise may be found with Russia, but obviously the fight has to continue. You've been clear you think Ukraine should not cede any land. Are you open to some sort of a compromise or some sort of negotiation?
Yes, of course, there's always room for compromise. We can talk about the sums of reparations that Russia is to pay to Ukraine and all the other countries that have been supporting Ukraine through the years and through this particular months of escalation of Russian aggression. We can talk of a discount. That's the compromise we're prepared to go on.
Nothing involving land.
Why should we? If Ukraine goes in concessions as to land or as to any other of the demands that Putin is making right now, we're actually going to be putting the whole world at risk, at a very, very big defense and security risk for the framework of peace and security that exists today in the world. If Ukraine is going to be ceding any land, we're going to be sending a message to all the other totalitarian leaders and dictators out there who will clearly have the notion that it's okay to go ahead to push on with aggression, and then at the end of the day, the international community is going to do nothing, and they may even end up as winners with some land snatched off.
There's been concern by both the U.S. and NATO that Belarus could join the war, the invasion with Russia, could send in forces. How much would that change the nature of the conflict?
Not much. I believe that the forces in Belarus are not as numerous as they say they are. Plus, not many people in Belarus want to fight. I am in constant contact with many of friends that I have in Belarus, or Belarusians who have actually left the country, but are still very well connected. And they say all in one voice that the Belarusian army is not going to be fighting in Ukraine. The only way that they can be made to fight is if Russian officers are actually put in charge of them, and if the death squads are actually marching behind the Belarusian army, making them go in and invade Ukraine. There have been notices handed in by the soldiers of the Belarusian army and the officers of the Belarusian army saying that they will not invade Ukraine and they don't want to do it. And the resilience is very strong. Even if they do, even if the Belarusian soldiers are made to cross the border and walk into Ukraine, I doubt that this will be a force that Ukraine will really have to reckon with. And I'm pretty sure that most of the Belarusian soldiers will just be very happy to lay down their arms and to be taken hostage by the Ukrainian military.
Given the success that Ukrainian forces have had on the ground against Russian forces, are you concerned that Russia may just try to do to Kyiv what they have been doing to Mariupol, essentially just try to destroy the city?
That is one of the most difficult questions that I have heard over the last weeks, and unfortunately I have to answer that yes. Russia, the war tactics they are employing, they are absolutely barbaric. Some call it in the formal term of scourged earth, but it's more than that. The Russian army is deliberately targeting civilians. They're targeting women and children in particular.
Lesya Vasylenko, I appreciate your time, and please be careful.
Thank you very much, and glory to Ukraine. Keep supporting Ukraine.
We've also been checking throughout this entire invasion with Elena Ganas, who's been living with her 3 young children in a basement in Kyiv, while her husband, who was formerly a journalist.
She said he was close in age to the children that were pictured in his child pornography collection. The children pictured were 8 years old, Tucker. Do you believe that an 18-year-old has very much in common with an 8-year-old in terms of their one being an adult, the other being in the 3rd grade? These are not similar people. And so I think these are very real questions that go to her reasonableness to sit on the highest court in the land. And I think we deserve a robust questioning of her. And the argument that this is somehow out of bounds is wildly outlandish given what we just saw in the Brett Kavanaugh hearings 4 years ago.
Right, it's a Greta Thunberg play. It's like, we're going to bring someone on you're not allowed to criticize. I have to say, her views really seem like those of every affluent white liberal I've ever met. If you want a black candidate, I'm serious. I think the country would get better representation from, you know, she's just a carbon copy of everyone in the neighborhood I spent my life in, you know. Anyway,
this is what happens, Tucker. They want cosmetic diversity, but everybody to have the exact same opinions. No diversity of thought, diversity of appearance. It's scary.
If you picked a rap star off the street, that person's views would more likely be closer to the views of the average American than the views of this woman. I would argue. I've bet money on it, actually.
I was in the 160s, by the way, since people probably want to know about my LSAT scores. There you go.
I had trouble enough in college, I know. I'm happy to admit it.
I disclosed them.
Dependence is built on clean energy.
But a bigger nest egg.
All the glass was shaking, and there was one loud explosion, and like everybody like stood still. Then there was another explosion, and I said, "Run into the shelter," and we started running, and we ran, and yes, and later we found out what was it, because you know when it happens you do not understand what's happening. But you know what my husband told me later? He said, you know, if you hear the explosion, it's good, because that means you're still alive. So it's good.
You were saying, I mean, all the time we've talked, you spend so much time trying to make life as normal as possible for your children. I know you said right before the curfew you got some gifts for them. What did you get?
We were just, before the curfew, there were long queues everywhere to all the supermarkets here. So I decided not to stay for such long time. So I just was like walking in the neighborhood looking what is available. And what was available is a shop where I could buy toys. So I just said, okay, kids, you can go and choose whatever you want. And Katya have chosen a paper house
A
to
dollhouse?
make like a box.
We're seeing it now, yeah.
Yeah,
It's beautiful.
And this is very symbolical because it looks like she wants to have the feeling of home. Yeah, having her home is very important to her. And Taras picked up a helicopter, a police helicopter with police cars, because for him, I think it's very important to feel protected and protect the others, and to restore justice, because they say what's happening right now is not fair, because this is what I am telling them and what they understand.
So I know last time we spoke, you said that he says he wants to now be a military pilot. So he has the police helicopter now, I guess, to practice a little bit. I love what you said. It's so interesting what you said, that Katya's, that the doll house for her is important because the idea of having a home is so important.
Yes, exactly.
Does it, the last time you were at home, or one of the times you were at home, I remember you saying, the apartment that you lived in before the war, that you said to the kids at a certain point, we're going to go home, and you meant back to the basement. That home has become the basement. Do you think Katya feels that way?
A little bit, yeah, a little bit. We brought already so many things here into the basement. We made this place like almost like home. We have here our pillows, our like small blankets, some toys. We sleep here all the time, so it's already almost 1 month that we sleep here in the basement, and we really feel here like more relaxed and protected than upstairs on the 8th floor. And I do not want to lose this home while we are at war to move anywhere. And we have this illusion of safety here.
You feel the basement is safer than the lottery of staying in an apartment?
Yes. For me, this is my maybe subjective feeling, but I feel here, I know that here I can fall asleep and I can feel relaxed. And I know that children are relaxed if they see me relaxed, and they can sleep if I can sleep. And I know that it's only me left, like my husband is on duty, so he's not available right now. So 3 kids, they are my responsibility, and I just need to be safe and strong enough. And I've decided to stay in Kiev, not to move anywhere, but at least here, I have to be as safe as possible, because I'm not going to be a martyr. Yes, I don't want to die. I want to survive and want my children to survive. And in this situation, I think I'm doing the most of what I can do to keep them safe, and at the same time to be useful for my country and to win in this war.
I know you were able to see your husband, I think it was yesterday, for about 30 minutes. We have some video of him playing with the kids. It seems so normal, that scene. If you looked at it, you would never know what was going on outside.
Yes, and basically what you see, this mess around in the room, this is normal for us too. This is how it looked before the war. It's not because of the war. This is our normal situation when children mess around. Like our living room is like a big playing room where they do, different kind of things. Yes, and they really wanted, to eat him, to kiss him, to bite him, to hug him. Just. Yeah, they miss him a lot.
Yeah. Well, I'm so glad to talk to you, and I wish you well, and I wish you continued strength.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Hope to see you again.
Yes, we will. Elena Ganes and her family. Well, we will take up the apparent Ukrainian counteroffensive shortly. We're with retired Army Lieutenant General Mark Hertling.
Next, with historic Supreme Court confirmation hearings for Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. Now, in a brief recess, we'll look at the day's key moments, and we'll be joined by Senator Amy Klobuchar.
Really stood out to me was everyone, the valet, the people who worked at the hotel, the people who worked at the comedy club, even a courier. They all said just what a nice and polite guy Bob Saget was.
Right. I think that gets at the heart of it, Brian, is that he was so beloved by so many on TV, by people who never even met him, by those who were in his inner circle, that the mysterious circumstances around the blunt force to his head, you just want to make sense of it, right? You want to understand what happened to him and have some sort of, I guess, moral justice for it all. But still so many questions. Brian, as always, thank you. Coming up next, the Crumleys in court, what a judge ruled today that will impact the trial involving a set of parents whose son is accused of opening fire inside of that Michigan high school. That story next.
And you argued that they were punitive, and you further say in the note, if they're punitive, they're unconstitutional.
I was looking at 4 different kinds of laws, and not all of them, did I say, were punitive.
Okay, so let's take civil commitments laws. If you look at civil commitment laws right now, the UCLA School of Law Williams Institute estimates more than 6,300 sex offenders are currently detained in civil commitment programs. If the view you advocated prevailed, presumably those 6,300 sex offenders would be released to the public. Is that an outcome that should be concerning?
Senator, in law school, when I was writing a note, I was looking at a brand new set of laws that had not previously been enacted in any jurisdiction. They were new. And I was assessing at the time, as law school students do, what criteria I thought might be used by courts to make a determination in the future as to whether or not they should be treated as punitive and therefore not unconstitutional, but as therefore ones that carry with them certain rights versus, preventative.
Judge Jackson, so you've pointed that these were views in law school, and listen, I will recognize that all of us, when we are students, may have views that as time and maturity passes on, we may change. But what troubles me is this was not just a law school view, it's one that has continued. So when you were vice chairman of the Sentencing Commission, you expressed significant concerns that the White House has argued that your quotes were taken out of context. So I want to provide the full context of your quote, because you said, yes, I want to ask you about the means by which we can distinguish more or less serious offenders. I know that all of you have sort of touched on that. Mr. Futrell, you talked about going from singular to one-on-one to group experience. I'm just wondering if there's some sort of inevitable and natural progression from one stage to the other, such that you could say that the least serious offenders are in the singular experience stage. And I guess my thought is, in looking at some of the testimony that other people will have later in the day, I was surprised at some of the testimony with respect to the motivation of offenders, and we're talking about child pornography offenders, and that there are people who get involved with this kind of activity who may not be pedophiles and who may not be necessarily interested really in the child pornography, but have other motivations with respect to the use of technology and being in the group. And here are lots of reasons perhaps why people might engage in this. And so I'm wondering whether you could say that there could be a less serious child pornography offender who is engaging in the type of conduct in the group experience level because their motivation is the challenge or to use the technology. They're very sophisticated technologically, but they aren't necessarily that interested in the child pornography piece of it. Now I find that a pretty remarkable argument, that people in possession of child pornography are not actually interested in the child porn. They're not pedophiles. They're just interested in technology. Is that? And I wanted to provide the whole quote because the White House said that portions of this were used out of context. So this is your entire quote. Do you agree with that sentiment, that there is some meaningful population of people who have child pornography but are not, in fact, pedophiles or getting satisfaction from it?
Thank you, Senator, for allowing me to address what appears to be a question that I was asking in the context of a hearing on child pornography. You've provided the entire quote, and it looks as though I was asking that of someone, not taking that position. And the position that I've taken in all of my sentencings involving child pornography offenders is to ensure that despite the attitude and view of many of the offenders who came before me when I was a trial judge, that they were just lookers, that they weren't really harming anyone, that they were curating their collections and they never touched a child, I made sure that they understood that notwithstanding their collecting behavior, that they were causing significant harm.
So Judge Jackson, all right, you raise your actual sentencing, and I think that's very productive. Let's take a look at your actual sentencing. And you've had 10 different cases involving child pornography. These are the cases. There are two, U.S. versus Buttry and U.S. versus Can, for which the government did not make a recommendation. And you said earlier, when Chairman Durbin was trying to preempt this line of attack, you said it's a sickening and egregious crime, which I very much agree with. And you said the guidelines lead to extreme departures. Okay? Let's look at what the prosecutors are asking for. And I would note that this was in the District of Columbia, where prosecutors are far more liberal than many of the prosecutors in this country. And in every case in which, so United States versus Hess, there was a mandatory statutory minimum of 60 months, and you imposed 60 months because you had no discretion. In United States versus Nickerson, there was a mutual agreement of the parties to 120 months, and that's what you imposed. In every other case, United States versus Chazen, the prosecutor asked for 78 to 97 months. You imposed 28 months. 28 months is a 64% reduction. In United States versus Cooper, the prosecutor asked for 72 months. You imposed 60 months. That was a 17% reduction. In United States versus Downs, the prosecutor asked for 70 months. You imposed 60. That was a 14% reduction. In United States versus Hawkins, the prosecutor asked for 24 months. You imposed 3 months. That was an 88% reduction. In United States versus Savage, the prosecutor asked for 49 months. You imposed 37. That was a 24% reduction. In United States versus Stewart, the prosecutor asked for 97 months. You imposed 57. That was a 41% reduction. Every single case, 100% of them, when prosecutors came before you with child pornography cases, you sentenced the defenders to substantially below, not just the guidelines, which are way higher, but what the prosecutor asked for on average of these cases, 47.2% less. Now, you said you made sure the voice of the children was heard. Do you believe in a case like United States versus Hawkins, where the prosecutor asked for 24 months and you sentenced the offender to only 3 months? Do you believe the voice of the children is heard when 100% of the time you're sentencing those in possession of child pornography to far below what the prosecutor's asking for?
Yes, Senator, I do.
Could you explain how?
I will. A couple of observations. One is that your chart does not include all of the factors that Congress has told judges to consider, including the probation office's recommendation in these cases.
Well, Judge Jackson, we don't have those probation. The committee has not been given the probation office's recommendation. We would welcome them. Mr. Chairman, I would love to see those. We don't have access to them.
The second thing I would say is that I take these cases very seriously as a mother, as someone who, as a judge, has to review the actual evidence in these cases and, based on Congress's requirement, take into account not only the sentencing guidelines, not only the recommendations of the parties, but also things like the stories of the victims. Also things like the nature and circumstances of the offense and the history and characteristics of the defendant. Congress is the body that tells sentencing judges what they're supposed to look at. And Congress has said that a judge is not playing a numbers game. The judge is looking at all of these different factors and making a determination in every case based on a number of different considerations. And in every case, I did my duty to hold the defendants accountable in light of the evidence and the information that was presented to me.
In 100% of the cases, was the evidence less than the prosecutors asked for?
Senator, the evidence in these cases are egregious. The evidence in these cases are among the worst that I have seen, and yet, as Congress directs, judges don't just calculate the guidelines and stop. Judges have to take into account the personal circumstances of the defendant because that's a requirement of Congress. Judges have to consider things like the victims, and when I was talking about making sure that victims' circumstances are heard, it was about my sentencing practices.
Well,
that I
show victims being heard with respect. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And 3 more senators will get to question the nominee this evening.
A wedding, a garden party.
Well, because many nutrients are colored.
And carnage in Aleppo, you bear responsibility for these atrocities. Denying or obfuscating the facts, as you will do today, saying up is down, black is white, will not absolve you. Are you truly incapable of shame? Is there literally nothing that can shame you? Is there no act of barbarism against civilians, no execution of a child that gets under your skin?
Following month, Ambassador Power focused her final major speech on Russia, explaining how the country that had once helped to build up the rules-based international order was now breaking it down.
Russia's actions are not standing up a new world order. They are tearing down the one that exists. And this is what we are fighting against. Having defeated the forces of fascism and communism, we now confront the forces of authoritarianism and nihilism.
And Samantha Power joins me ahead.
One of my favorite supplements is quinol turmeric. Turmeric.
Plan at Fidelity, Nina has a plan based on what matters most to her.
Your son was a ticking time bomb. And what did you do about it? Did you get him counseling? Did you get him help? No. You bought him a gun. And then when he was crying out for help, you LOL'd him. It's very similar to what they did after he was put in a jail cell, after he was arrested. What did the parents do? They fled. And when they were arrested, they hired a private lawyer for themselves and left their son with a public defender.
What about James Crumley and all this? He bought the gun. Prosecutors argue it wasn't secured. He is the one who called 911. Does his defense look different, and how so?
Yes, and that's why the judge wanted to make sure that they waived their right to not appeal. So, for example, the judge knew that the father probably could have a claim against the mother, saying that, hey, it was her fault. She's the one to blame. And if they're found guilty, then they both could say ineffective assistance of counsel, we should not have been represented by the same lawyer. And that's why the judge is making them sign a waiver, and that's why the judge is making them get their own lawyer. Because although the parents are in cahoots right now, they're all buddy-buddy, and they have spousal privilege, meaning they can't be forced to testify against each other, that could end. They could both decide to each their own, go their separate ways, and try to save themselves. So that's why the judge and the prosecution wanted to prevent a mistrial or a reversal on appeal. It's been known to happen before in situations like this.
It's anyone's guess. Real quick, Dave, I'm out of time, but do the parents' proceedings have any bearing on Ethan Crumbley's court appearances and what's next for him?
No, two separate cases. Yeah. And the parents need to worry about their own case, because I think that the prosecution has a really good set of facts against them.
Well, we're going to be following it very closely, Dave. As always, we appreciate your insight. Good to see you.
Thanks, Marnie.
Coming up next, viral video of a dangerous stunt. Why the driver is no stranger to police or social media. Look at that. The man now left to pick up the pieces is going to be joining us next.
Is
flowing with nourishing food and the knowledge.
to the bone.
Road trip.
Billion Hyundai has a great selection of fuel-efficient vehicles to help you get
deciding cases, and we'll talk about that in a moment. I'm not going to ask you, nor should I, how would you would decide a case. And I'm not going to ask you, nor should I, to tell me whether you think a particular precedent is a good precedent or not. So, but I am going to talk to you about the law. But first, you don't support efforts to delegitimize the United States Supreme Court, do you?
Senator, I have nothing but esteem for the United States Supreme Court, for my hopefully future colleagues on the court, and the work that the court does.
Can we agree that the calls to pack the court delegitimize the court?
Senator, it would not be appropriate for me, in my view, to comment on calls to pack the court, as you say, to increase the number, to do any structural changes. Those are policy determinations for Congress. What the consequences of those are policy considerations for Congress. I'm just looking forward to working with the brilliant people who are there at whatever size Congress decides, if I'm confirmed.
Well, the calls to pack the court don't legitimize the court, do they?
Well, Senator, I think that would be for you to decide.
I'm asking your opinion.
Respectfully, Senator, I'm not in a position to give my opinion on issues that are policy issues concerning the court, and not something that a judge would have to consider or should consider, in my view.
Yeah, but you're a citizen.
Oh, I am.
And as best I can tell, a very good one. I don't understand why you won't weigh in on this issue. Tell me why you won't weigh in on this issue.
Senator, I feel so strongly about ensuring that judges remain out of political debates. And this is something that is being debated. It is something that other nominees, Justice Barrett was asked about the same sort of thing and also declined to give her opinion. And I think that was the right way to handle this particular issue.
So you think Judge Barrett was right to dodge the question?
I think that each judge has to make a determination when asked about whether they would like to speak to issues, and I know that I'm not comfortable, in part because I'm so committed to making sure that there's confidence in me in terms of public confidence and my ability to stay in my lane, my ability to not speak to contentious political issues.
You have an opinion, though, don't you?
Senator, any opinion that I would have is not something that would ever come up in my work as a judge, something that I would ever rely on. This is a political issue for Congress.
But do you have an opinion, Judge?
Not a strongly held opinion, actually.
But you have an opinion.
I haven't really thought about it, but I hear the arguments on both sides, and I understand it to be a political issue.
Now, Judge, you're very intelligent and you're very articulate, and I know you're very well informed. You're telling me you don't have an opinion about packing the United States Supreme Court.
Senator, I have opinions about a lot of things. I don't have an opinion that I think it appropriate to share. I work very hard to set aside my opinions when I'm thinking about cases, which is the work of a judge. And so this particular issue is one that is very contentious, as you say, one that's in the province of Congress, and one that I think it not appropriate for me to comment on.
I understand that. But I think it would tell us a lot about you if you would answer the question. I'm a little confused about your answer earlier. It's probably more my fault than yours. Do you have an opinion about whether these efforts to pack the United States Supreme Court delegitimize the court? Do you have an opinion?
Senator, I have an opinion about the efforts. It's not an opinion that I think is appropriate for me to share. And so therefore, I don't have anything further to add.
So you do have an opinion, but you don't want to share it. Is that?
I don't think it's appropriate for me as a nominee to comment on a political matter that is in the province of Congress.
Well, in deciding to join the United States Supreme Court, if you're affirmed, wouldn't it make a difference to you whether you're one of 9 or one of 28?
Would it make a difference?
That impacts the judiciary? That involves the judiciary?
Senator, it certainly involves the judiciary. I would be thrilled to be one of however many Congress thought it appropriate to put on the court.
Okay. So you'd be okay if it was 28?
If that's Congress's determination, yes. The Congress makes political decisions like that.
Okay.
Tesla into the back of my car, and then I woke up the next morning and found out it was a viral.
Men now in the first aid aisle.
All of this is okay. All of this stuff that has nothing to do with her judicial background, that has nothing to do with her decision-making process, all of this is in bounds, according to Republicans.
Ukrainian forces, how essential will that be moving forward for them?
Well, both the javelins and the stingers that we've talked about so many times are important. Drones will be critically important. The Ukrainians are pushing back with their artillery now, and I think that's what we're seeing outside of Kyiv. And in order to have a counter-artillery battery barrage to take out the other person's artillery, you have to have counter-fire radar, the kind of radar that tells you where the Russians are shooting from. But you also can strike those artillery pieces and some of the tanks with drones and with javelin missiles. I think that's what we're seeing outside the city limits of Kyiv right now. The battle that's going on there, I would suggest, in seeing the smoke coming out of that, those are not artillery rounds falling, Anderson. Those are things burning. And I would bet that it's the Ukrainians that are actually having an effect on the Russian forces in and around Kyiv and some of the other major places. Remember, we're 4 weeks into this. Other than Mariupol, which has been really destroyed, Russia has not taken any other city. And that's just phenomenal based on the objectives that Putin had.
Yeah, it's stunning. Lieutenant General Mark Carling, always appreciate it. Thank you. Just had more on our other breaking news story this hour. The Senate confirmation hearings for Supreme Court nominee Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. Back now from dinner break. We'll take you there live next.
United Healthcare Medicare plans offer so much more.
trying to put the pieces together, and the police not having any leads, telling us they probably weren't going to be able to catch the guy.
Home and abroad, Senator Ted Cruz, he'll react tonight on Hannity.
Example, we could go back to Thurgood Marshall's confirmation hearings where we had the same kind of questions about whether or not he was soft on crime, his defense of criminals. All of this was sort of raised as evidence that he could not follow the rule of law, that he was soft on crime. And so we're seeing just a reprise of this. It's just a different African American. But I just want to underscore, the Republicans know that Ketanji Brown Jackson is going to sit on the Supreme Court, barring some cataclysmic event that is unlikely to happen. This isn't about her. This is about what happens in the midterm elections in 2022. It's what happens in 2024. It's about laying these dog whistle breadcrumbs for their base and for swing voters so that they can redeem them and collect them later in these political campaigns. This is political theater, pure and simple. Her confirmation, regrettably, is simply the forum for airing it.
It's very true. And the last thing I would just say is that, this is sort of a superficial point. There's lots of people who are brilliant and incredible and aren't like particularly great on TV or like talking in this setting. And there's people who are great at talking who I wouldn't want to put on the Supreme Court, but like, she is shockingly and remarkably good at that. Like, as someone who puts people on TV for a living, like, I have just been struck. I knew about her. I knew about her incredible reputation, all these parts of her CV beforehand, but just seeing her there, like, wow, she's good at that. She really is like a very, very formidable and impressive presence, and we'll get to see more of her later tonight and tomorrow. Ellie Mistel and Melissa Murray, thank you both. All right, if you were confused about the order of the show because I teased Samantha Power, you are paying attention. She's the former ambassador to the United Nations. She's one of the key members of the Biden administration on the front lines of the refugee crisis unfolding in Europe right now. USAID Administrator Samantha Power joins me next, I promise.
Joy Behar took a tumble on the path onto the set of The View the other day.
You're like, there is a God.
Come on, just stop, just stand. Let me tell you, these chairs.
I'm sure I'll tumble one day. I'm sure I have, but I'm still going to enjoy it. Of course, and just like a proper granolacrat. The first thing she says when they turn the camera is like, "Who do I sue?" It's like, God.
Have you ever met Joy Behar?
No, but you know what? I'd hang out with her, have a beer, and sit down.
Yeah,
we'd probably have a great conversation. Even if I tell somebody to go F themselves, or this, that, and the other, I'd still sit down with them, cut it up. I'm positive, no matter who.
Of responsibility. To say stay in your lane is the shorthand that I'm using for indicating that judges should not be policymakers, that those responsibilities are left to the elected branches, and that judges are to interpret the law, not make the law. And I use it to refer to the part of my methodology that is mindful of the constraints on judicial authority.
Okay. Well put. So let me ask you. We can go to the Constitution, let's say the Bill of Rights, to narrow the discussion, and read about our explicit rights. Religious freedom, our right not to be unreasonably searched or seized, freedom of speech, they're right there. That's why they call them explicit. But the court has ruled we have a bunch of unenumerated rights. Am I correct?
The court has determined there are certain personal rights related to individual autonomy that are implicit in the concept of ordered liberty or deeply rooted in our nation's history or tradition.
But they're unenumerated?
Yes.
Okay. Should these unenumerated rights that only Supreme Court justices can see, should they be decided by the people?
I want to play you one right now. This is from earlier today with Texas Senator Ted Cruz.
Critical race theory frames all of society as a fundamental and intractable battle between the races. It views every conflict as a racial conflict. Do you think that's an accurate way of viewing society in the world we live in?
Senator, I don't think so, but I've never studied critical race theory and I've never used it. It doesn't come up in the work that I do as a judge.
Joined now by Bakari Sellers, the CNN political commentator, former Democratic state lawmaker from South Carolina, also the author of a children's book, new book, Who Are Your People? Also Nia Malika Henderson, our senior political analyst, and Jeffrey Toobin, a former federal prosecutor and CNN chief legal analyst. Jeff, what do you make of how this is going so far?
Well, I think the nominee is doing just fine. What was most interesting to me today was the insight about where the Republican Party is today and what putative presidential candidates are trying to do. We just saw Ted Cruz trying to use critical race theory, which had absolutely nothing to do with the judge's qualifications or her record. He just wanted to make it clear that he was against it. But by far the weirdest half hour that we saw was Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri devoting his entire half hour to one case that the judge decided, a case involving an 18-year-old accused of possessing child pornography, and it allowed Senator Hawley to talk about pedophilia and pornography in a way that was quite clear and appeal to the QAnon vote. The cult that is now a bigger part of the Republican Party, and this weird obsession that QAnon has with Democrats and pedophilia. And I think, you know, that was really the agenda that Senator Hawley had, that had really almost nothing to do with the nomination for the Supreme Court.
Play some of what he said.
It really bothers me when in every case, child porn case you've had discretion, you've sentenced below the guidelines and below the government's recommendation. And saying that sex offenders are truly shunned in our society, is it your view that society is too hard on sex offenders? You say they truly are shunned in society. You wrote that many of these laws are products of a climate of fear, hatred, and revenge. So just is that still your view? I mean, do you think that these laws are too tough, that we're too tough on sex offenders? Explain what you meant in this case in 2013, and it seems to be the same thing you said many years ago.
Senator, it's not the same thing I said many years ago. Many years ago, as a law school student, I was evaluating a new set of legislation, state laws about registration, and I was analyzing them as law students do. It wasn't about the sex crime, it was about the characterization of the law. Is it a punitive law? Is it a prescriptive law? And how would a court go about determining that? That was the frame that I used then. It could have been about anything. It was about the characterization of legislation.
Nia, I'm wondering what you make of how the judge is doing and the line of questioning.
Yeah, listen, she has displayed remarkable restraint and patience with a lot of these ridiculous questions. And I think Jeffrey Toobin is exactly right. There's a lot of dog whistling to folks in QAnon with some of these questions. I had initially said when Judge Jackson was nominated, when her name was floated, that they would try to make her a caricature and make her out to be someone who would try to force feed children critical race theory. And that's exactly what Ted Cruz tried to do in the hearings today, asking her a question about whether or not she thinks babies are racist. Her answer saying this was well outside of the purview of what she would do as a justice and what she has done already as a judge, I think is a spot-on response. We'll see further what other Republicans try to do, but there are many Republicans on this committee who want to run for president in 2024, want to be on Fox News and want to use this as a fundraiser. So that's what we've seen from many Republicans. But overall, she's done quite well. I think there's nothing that we saw today that would suggest that she won't be the next justice on the Supreme Court.
Bakari, if it's a Republican judge or a conservative judge, we often see grandstanding by people asking these questions. So it's not completely out of the realm of the history that we have seen at other hearings. I'm wondering what stands out to you about the kind of questions she's getting.
Well, I mean, first and foremost, I mean, we've heard these type of questions before. Jeffrey Toobin, slightly older than I am, more of a scholar, will probably tell you that these line of questions remind you of the same questions that Thurgood Marshall had. This is not a new playbook that the Republicans are showing forth today. The fact is they're trying to make black folk out to be hyper-criminalized or sympathetic to criminals, as you see that line of questioning. You see the indoctrination of little white children or white babies, as Nia talked about, through CRT. But what you also see is something that's more succinct and something that's more profound. There are two things that I noticed today. One is that you had two older black individuals, the parents of Judge Jackson, have to sit in that room with such patience and grace and see their overly qualified daughter have to take on this bombardment of asinine, ignorant, anti-intellectual questions being thrown at her, although she is equally, if not more qualified than any justice to sit on the court. And then, Anderson, you saw a black woman have to be equally, if not more qualified, sit in front of these individuals who were lobbing questions that were beneath the dignity of their office. And so I didn't think of it from the same perspective of Jeffrey in terms of the most asinine line of questioning coming from Josh Hawley, because I actually gave that award to Tom Cotton. But that just goes to show you that there are many individuals who are not asking these legally succinct questions. If you disagree with her about precedent, that's fine. But she's not someone who sympathizes with pedophilia. That's outside the lines and bounds of what should be asked in some of these hearings. But as Nia Malika Henderson can probably respond better than any of the other three of us on here, this is what black women or women in general have to deal with on a daily basis. This is a microcosm that's probably going to backfire on Republicans in a larger political sense.
2 minutes.
No, I think that's right.
Please,
and if you compare how she has had to comport herself to the way Brett Kavanaugh comported himself during his hearing when he was getting tough questioning, the sort of tantrum he threw, and the way she is just sitting there taking these questions on, goes to show the kind of line and tightrope that black women in positions of power and trying to get a higher position have to kind of toe the line in terms of their behavior.
And John Kennedy, 2 minutes.
Not, it would be a prudent course of action for the Supreme Court to hold that there were other rights in the Ninth Amendment. That's
well, the reason I'm asking, Judge, is you've talked a lot today about judicial restraint. And that's kind of like being for children and prosperity. We're all for children and prosperity and judicial restraint. But the rubber meets the road when you get down to, well, what does that mean? What does that mean?
What it's meant for me, Senator, is what you've seen in my opinions, in the way that I've approached issues that have been before me, in my fidelity to the restraints that exist in the law in terms of the exercise of judicial authority. That adherence to precedent, for example, is something that I do, and even in cases, as you heard me discuss earlier, in which they're not binding precedents, I find that the court
remains in a virtual standstill, and this as reports emerge that Russian soldiers are now running short on food and gas and other basic supplies. We could always hope, as thousands, sadly, of casualties mount. Vladimir Putin's invasion is not going as planned, and now many Western officials fear the worst, including potential biological and chemical weapons attacks. Now, we got to stop right here. Because Vladimir Putin keeps making nuclear threats, chemical weapons of threats, bioweapon threats. Joe Biden and all of our NATO allies need to stop cowering at the words of Vladimir Putin. He makes a threat, and you bubble and fizz like Alka-Seltzer in water. In other words, you're being intimidated. You're allowing yourself to be intimidated, and you're acting and looking kind of gutless. Lead all of our allies, Joey, and strongly tell Putin that you're all united. And if he does cross that line, and it's a chemical, biological, or God forbid nuclear attack, God forbid any of these attacks, he will be met with a response 10 times worse for him. Do we want that? Of course we don't want that. His troops and Russia will then be in the crosshairs if he crosses that line where NATO nations are impacted. Whatever you say, you need to do. So know that fact, too. Now, because Putin's spokesperson won't rule out even the use of nuclear weapons, well, take a look for yourself.
President Putin has laid that card on the table. President Putin said that if anybody tries to stop him, very bad things will happen. And I want to know whether you are convinced or confident that your boss will not use that option.
Well, we have a concept of domestic security. And, well, it's public. You can read all the reasons for nuclear arms to be used. So if it is an existential threat for our country, then it can be used in accordance with our concept.
Now, obviously, it has to be taken very seriously. Vladimir Putin is backed into a corner. He's been embarrassed on the world stage. He's anxious, clearly paranoid, angry. God only knows what he'll do next. He's had no problem killing innocent men, women, and children. And by the way, NATO, not only the U.S., not the U.S. alone, they need to spell out what the immediate consequences would be, because those weapons of war would trigger Article 5 of the NATO alliance. Now, Putin's soldiers have already leveled entire towns. They've blown up women and children's hospitals. They've bombed playgrounds. They've bombed schools. They've shot peaceful protesters in the light of day, shot Ukrainians waiting in a bread line, and used cluster bombs and, of course, their hypersonic weapon to show off to the world as well. Now, the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv is accusing Russia of kidnapping over 2,000 Ukrainian children and shipping them across the border into Russia. So ask yourself, what is stopping Putin from escalating this war even further with chemical or biological weapons? I hope he doesn't. But the question is the West, is NATO, is Joe ready to respond if he does? Do you have confidence in Joe Biden's ability to respond appropriately? Because I don't. Now, yesterday, after another long weekend in Delaware, riding his little bicycle around town, Joe was babbling about something he referred to as the New World Order. Take very close note of this.
You know, we are at an inflection point, I believe, in the world economy. Not just the world economy, in the world. It occurs every 3 or 4 generations. As one of the top military people said to me in a secure meeting the other day, 60 million people died between 1900 and 1946. And since then, we established a liberal world order, and that hadn't happened in a long while. A lot of people dying, but nowhere near the chaos. And now is a time when things are shifting. There's going to be a new world order out there, and we've got to lead it, and we've got to unite the rest of the free world in doing it.
Allow me to translate. This is a tip of the hat to Biden's climate alarmist religious cult, New Green Deal socialist base. Instead of putting America first and making America great again, we will be all asked to sacrifice more and more and live more simple communal lives together. in order to somehow save Mother Earth? This is not some kind of vast right-wing conspiracy. If you recall, last year, Biden vowed to fundamentally change our economy. On the campaign trail, he told voters, he told you that he would end fossil fuels. Well, he's following up on that promise. He promised to kill the Keystone Pipeline. He did. He banned drilling on federal lands, auctions on federal lands. He ended exploration in Anwar. He praised the Green New Deal, incorporated all of it into his Bernie Biden manifesto, and now you, the American people, are paying $4 or $5 a gallon for gasoline. And by the way, congratulations to Los Angeles tonight, because the average cost for a gallon of gasoline is officially average cost over $6.
Forces that were sent to invade Ukraine. U.S. officials say that for the first time, Russian forces have begun shelling the port city of Mariupol, not from the ground, but from the water, which is a sign that their ground forces continue to struggle to gain and maintain new ground. And so for the people in Ukraine trying to beat back Russia's assault on their nation, that is the good news. But for the people who are still in Ukraine, every day is a repeat of the same nightmare. NBC's Gabe Gutierrez has this report tonight.
It seems unreal.
It's become a bleak existence. This is the dark, frigid basement where a dozen families cram together each night, huddled by candlelight, fueled by defiance.
When the bombing is going, then you never know where it will drop.
Victoria Filotova works for a charity in Chernihiv, that's in northern Ukraine near Belarus. Russian troops have surrounded the city, but it's hanging on. So are other cities like Mariupol and Kharkiv.
This is not the war between Ukraine and Russia. This is the war between light and darkness, between goodness and evil. We are determined to protect our land and to stay here.
Many others have not stayed. More from ravaged cities arriving in Lviv today. Natalie is from Kyiv, surrounded by Russian troops on three sides. She decided to get out with her family before it's too late. Others are making the remarkable choice to return.
A humanitarian corridor opened up today, and this train is being loaded up with supplies and people who are heading back east to pick up loved ones.
This woman is coming back from Poland to care for her sick father in eastern Ukraine. This mother is returning with her young daughter. This is my country, she says firmly. Refugees now top 3.5 million. As a volunteer train conductor, Serhiy has seen a lot of them. The defiance in places like Mariupol weighs heavily on him.
Mariupol right now is stronghold of freedom. It's stronghold of the all democracy world.
Stronghold of all democracy in the world. NBC's Gabe Gutierrez reporting tonight from Ukraine. Today, the French government announced that there appears to be no ceasefire agreement in sight that could halt the fighting in Ukraine. Russia ratcheted up tension today, saying that the country refuses to rule out the use of nuclear weapons, as long as it is facing what it is vaguely defining as an existential threat. The U.S. National Security Advisor warned today that the war will, quote, not end easily or rapidly, which is becoming more and more apparent every day as we close out day 27 of this brutal war. Joining us now live from Lviv is NBC correspondent Ali Arouzi. Ali, thank you for being up at this hour with us. It seems like Ukrainian troops are pushing back against Russian forces in certain areas of the country, even though Russia continues to bombard the cities and cause heavy damage. What are you hearing about where things are tonight?
That's right, Ali. That's in the suburbs of Kyiv. Some of the Russian troops have made advances and occupied small parts of suburbs of Kyiv in the northwest, in Bucha, in Hostomel, and in Irpin. But in other parts, in the west of the city, Russian troops had made advances, but the Ukrainians fought back hard, as you mentioned in your report, and took back certain areas in the eastern suburbs of Kyiv. And that's because, Ali, Kyiv is a city on the hill. It's heavily fortified. Its streets and roads are very narrow, making it very hard for Russian tanks and heavy armament to maneuver their way around. And of course, because they've been met by fierce resistance by the Ukrainian forces trying to defend their capital, where President Zelensky is still standing and putting out these very strong messages to his armed forces and to the people. So despite a big push by the Russians trying to encircle Kyiv, they haven't been able to do it. That's one of their main objectives, to take the capital and other major strategic places like Mariupol.
Let's talk about Mariupol for a second. The images that we have seen this evening out of Mariupol, and literally for the last several days, make the place look like hell on earth. You've recently spoken with someone who's made it out of there just in the last few days.
That's right, Ali. Mariupol is the most hard-hit, the most destroyed city in Ukraine. They have taken the brunt of the Russian artillery, missiles, and bombs. And because it's such a strategic place for the Russians, it would create a land corridor to the Donbass region. If they were to take Mariupol, it would connect Russia to Crimea. And that would be a huge victory for the Russians, but they haven't been able to capture Mariupol, and that's made Russian commanders resort to medieval siege and starvation tactics. They've caused a humanitarian crisis in Mariupol. Incredibly, they blame the Ukrainian people for the humanitarian crisis because they wouldn't capitulate and give up their city. But the people of Mariupol are without food, without electricity, without running water, without heating, without gas. All the people we have spoken to paint a horrifying picture of what's going on in that city. I spoke to a young lady who managed to escape Mariupol a couple of days ago. Let's take a listen to what she had to say.
When I was going to sleep, I was crying and I was having nightmares every night because I was afraid that I would just die here. We were even discussing it with my family, hoping that if we die, it would be fast and not painful. We hoped not to die from hunger, because it would be, it would be much easier to die immediately. My sister told me that if we run out of food, we will commit suicide together.
It was really difficult to listen to that interview with her, Ali. I mean, it was really heartbreaking. She told me that when they were escaping Mariupol, they were met at Russian checkpoints. The Russian soldiers taunted them, laughed at them at what they had done in her city. She managed to escape with a pair of trainers and her laptop to get out of that city, and some of her family members. But for others there who remain in that city, it's a devastating situation, and the feeling is that the Russians are going to continue their relentless bombing of that city, with making little distinction between the military forces there and the civilian population that are still trying to hold on to their city, not least of all because it's so financially important to this country. All of Ukraine's coal, corn, and steel is shipped across the world from Mariupol, and if they're not going to be able to do that, that's also going to economically strangle the city. So a devastating situation, not only from a humanitarian point of view, but from a financial point of view for this country as well.
Ali, what a thing to hear them make a suicide pact if they didn't think they were going to make it out of that city. Thank you for your amazing reporting. Ali Arouzi is live for us in Lviv this late night. In just a minute, I'm going to be talking live with someone who just escaped from Mariupol with his family. That interview will be after this. But first, I want to get some thoughts from a military analyst on what we witnessed today on day 27 of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Joining me now is Rob Lee. He's a former Marine Corps infantry officer and an expert on Russian defense policy. He's currently a senior fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. Mr. Lee, thank you for joining us. It's good to see you this evening. I want to ask you about a senior Pentagon official telling reporters today that the Russian military's lost more than 10% of its combat power that was sent into Ukraine. There's no indication that reinforcements are being brought in from Russia, though we do know that they've been trying to recruit people into the military. Talk to me about this idea of losing 10% of your fighting force. In military terms, that's actually a turning point.
Yeah, I mean, it's significant because, you know, Russia clearly has not achieved its goals yet. It clearly wants to seize cities. It wants to encircle Kyiv, probably Odessa, some other areas. It clearly wants to further degrade the Ukrainian military. And at every step of the way, you know, Russia's facing significant attrition. And the more attrition they face, the more limitations they have on what kind of offensive operations can they do, and can they actually take big cities like Kyiv, which would require additional casualties. And so, you know, the figures we're seeing are, and this is being backed up by just open source information on number of destroyed or captured vehicles. All that's indicating that the Russian military is going to really struggle to conduct, you know, further offensive operations for weeks and weeks at a time, and really they're facing kind of a number of limitations at this point.
The Kremlin doesn't report on how many Russian troops have died. They do give out numbers, but they tend to be very low. We get much higher numbers from the Ukrainian government. We had a fairly sort of middle-of-the-road estimate by U.S. intelligence. But yesterday, a pro-Kremlin news outlet briefly reported that nearly 10,000 Russian soldiers had been killed, and then suddenly that reference was quickly removed from the website. What do we make of that? These numbers sound really remarkable for a major, long standing army like the Russian army.
Yeah, it's hard to tell. You know, it could be just a hack, or it could be an intelligence operation from the Ukrainians, who obviously know what they're doing in terms of intelligence. Or it could have been just a mistake, and it was, you know, actual factual information was published that wasn't supposed to be published. Hard to tell, but, you know, clearly we know the Russian military is taking heavy casualties, right? We can see this from destroyed vehicles, from destroyed convoys, that they're clearly sustaining really heavy casualties. And it's significant because it's not like anything Russia's faced in the last, you know, few wars they've fought, right? In Georgia, you know, they had fewer than 100 casualties or a few hundred deaths. In 2014, 2015 Ukraine, it was only in the, you know, the hundreds. In Syria, it was the low hundreds. So what they faced after a week in Ukraine this time was greater than the last 3 wars combined. And then, you know, that was weeks ago, and now the figures are obviously much greater. So even if that figure, you know, I don't know the veracity of it, but it's probably somewhere in the ballpark of what the actual casualty figures are. And when we talk about that, right, that's a substantial share of the Russian invasion force. And so again, that kind of attrition, it really affects what the Russian military can do at this point, because it limits their kind of the goals they can achieve.
Let me ask you about air support and Air Force. The Ukrainians do have an Air Force. They do have trained pilots. The New York Times has some interesting reporting about the Ukrainian Air Force and how it's operating in, quote, what the Times says, near total secrecy. One of the pilots they spoke to said, quote, in every fight with Russian jets, there's no equality. They always have 5 times more planes. And despite being outnumbered, Ukrainian pilots have been successful at preventing wider bombings. They've intercepted some missiles. Talk to me about this. They are vastly outnumbered by Russian jets. How is it? What's the outlook for the Air Force in Ukraine?
So that's one thing. It's not fully known. It's kind of hard to tell from these open sources exactly what they're doing, and partially because I think they want it that way. But clearly they're still operating, and clearly they're making life difficult for Russia. And then, you know, in terms of an invasion for Russia, they want to have air supremacy, where they can have, you know, fighter aircraft, bomber aircraft operating over Ukrainian forces at all times, being able to bomb them, to do reconnaissance, all those kind of things. And they clearly can't do that effectively right now. I think part of that is because Ukraine's air defenses are still intact, and part of that is because the Ukrainian Air Force is still operating and is still contesting the environment. So all of that makes it more difficult for the Russian Air Force. And a really key part of this is that you know, interdiction missions, the really key mission that the Russian Air Force would like to take part in, that would include, you know, preventing the Ukrainians from reinforcing locations, from resupplying cities, all those kind of things. And it's clear they're not really able to do that very effectively. And, you know, again, this is probably likely part of this is because the Ukrainian Air Force is still operating and still making the environment contested and making life difficult for the Russian Air Force, which is still, you know, part of the reason why Ukraine is resisting still today and why they're still having success.
Rob, thank you for your analysis. We appreciate it. Rob Lee.
Because of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. One other thing that, you know, we're all seeing this humanitarian crisis. We're seeing war. People in this country are starting to feel it. In the latest polls, including my own, foreign engagements has just catapulted up. It wasn't even an issue a couple of months ago. And it's right up there with a lot of distress at home. People are paying attention to this. They see what's happening. And make no mistake, on this whole question of nuclear and how to respond, it's Vladimir Putin who has said, and his defense minister today, or spokesperson said, oh, this is a military operation. We're only hitting military targets. Maternity hospitals, places of worship, places of work, people's homes where civilians are sheltering in place, those are not military targets. Everybody sees what this is. 10 million refugees and counting have escaped their home. And Vladimir Putin is making demands that should not be met. And America has to stand, as we always have, with our allies. And we just hear the president focus on another thing. You know, Vladimir Putin, Sean, Governor Huckabee, is threatening nuclear war, and John Kerry's talking about climate change.
Unbelievable.
We can't have this.
Yeah, he needs to enter the real world like the rest of us. He spent too many hours in his private jet spewing too many carbon emissions.
And at the same time, no proof of criminal wrongdoing by Joe Biden, no indication that he's under investigation whatsoever.
Now, I'm going to ask you about the Hunter Biden investigation in a moment. But here, I'm going to read a little piece of the smoking gun email the New York Post reported on. And it's supposedly coming from a Ukrainian official. Dear Hunter, thank you for inviting me to D.C. and giving me an opportunity to meet your father and spend some time together. It's really an honor and pleasure, etc. He goes on from there. I mean, that's the one, right? If it could be confirmed. But the concern is, and apparently there's some problem with that email account, right, from where it supposedly came from.
Well, what is going on with this alleged encounter at Cafe Milano remains a bit of a mystery. It's been confirmed that Joe Biden did stop by a dinner that included many of the attendees that were discussed on other emails as being at this event, along with the Burisma official on Hunter Biden's laptop. But the White House has denied that any encounter between Biden and the Burisma official at the dinner. Another attendee I spoke to doesn't recall the Burisma dinner. Really, whether an encounter occurred at this dinner or not. And if it did, we don't know whether it was substantive or significant or pleasantries. So there's sort of a black hole in the middle of this laptop scandal related to that email.
One thing, and is serious, is that the Hunter Biden investigation is continuing. What's the latest?
So witnesses have continued to go before the grand jury in recent weeks, including a woman who was the mother of a child of Hunter Biden's who sued him for. She and her lawyer turned documents that they had possession related to that paternity settlement. There is a tax component of this. There's also a money laundering and foreign lobby component, trying to determine if some of this work that Hunter Biden was doing for foreign interests should have been registered with the Justice Department. That is often a higher bar than merely a tax case. And the New York Times, on top of this, has reported that Hunter Biden has paid some of the back taxes that he owes, something that could influence a decision about whether or not to indict.
Ben Schreckinger, we postponed this segment a day just so we could make sure we had you on this segment, because you're actually out there talking to people who are at the dinner. You're actually doing the reporting and the hard work to figure out what happened. And you have been one of the few people who've been saying from the beginning, this is a real story, this is a serious story, and it's why we trusted you to come on the show and fact check us. Appreciate it, Ben.
Thanks so much for having me, Dad.
Coming up, Ambassador John Bolton dropping truth bombs on Russian television, going head-to-head with a Kremlin apologist.
Look forward to our ongoing conversation on that area of the law as well. Want to now revisit something that's been a theme throughout yesterday's opening statements and a lot of today's questions from members, and that's the general appreciation for diversity. Right, we're celebrating history, more than potential impact it would be for somebody like you to join the Supreme Court. I know some of my colleagues have touched on this already, so I'm going to take it to another level. While judges are certainly the face of the judicial branch, their work, as you can appreciate, is significantly supported by the work of law clerks. Now, typically these clerks are well-credentialed, talented young lawyers who spend a year closely with a judge who hires them, who helps them research the law and write legal opinions. Now, clerkships at the district court, the Court of Appeals, and even especially the Supreme Court are often a launching pad for a successful legal career. Many former clerks in the profession, they serve as law firm partners, public interest lawyers, public sector attorneys, and even federal judges. In fact, 7 current Supreme Court justices were federal clerks upon a time. Of the 9 justices, the Supreme Court itself. That many law students, graduates compete intensely for these coveted positions. But like the itself, the ranks of federal clerks are not particularly diverse. To a February 2021, the National Association, only 21% of federal clerks, 2019,